Thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. I'm actually personally very disappointed that I'm not able to be there in physical, but I'm so glad that my colleague Shahab will be there for any questions, and also he's speaking at the event here today and will have more answers than what I would be speaking for 10 more minutes. But as you know today, there's a very small distinction between when we talk about climate, development, poverty, sustainable energy. These are all very, very heavily linked. But unfortunately, what happens today is that we talk in silos. When we talk about climate, we talk about the environment, then we talk about the health, access to livelihoods, and then we say for mitigation, and then we talk about adaptation, and then we say both cannot work, and then we have the negotiations of the COP, etc. 1, 2, 3, 4, now we have COP 28. The issue is that today everything is so deeply interlinked that, and because it's not deeply interlinked, we are seeing not only the consequences of climate, where last year alone many of the places like poultry in Jharkhand and Odisha, where they lost 30% of the chicks because of heat stress, or the unusual floods in Assam, as well as the typhoons and so, or the cyclones in Mozambique, etc. Time is passing by, and we ourselves, you know, from the so-called civil society, as well as the people who are concerned about poverty, etc., we are just coming up with different targets of 2030, 2035. But it's high time actually we reversed our thought process for more implementation, so that the people, the 2 billion people across the world who today are living in poverty, but are actually bearing most of the consequences of climate, that we are not, from a development perspective, able to link both and saying that we are going to create interventions, and the most sustainable form of implementations are which link poverty and climate resilience together, right? So for example, I know today's topic is more of health, as Healthcare Without Harm says that if health was a country in its own, or the health sector, it would be the 5th largest polluter in the world. That's today. Today, when 2/3 of the population in Asia, Southeast Asia and Africa do not have access to reliable. Imagine what will happen when that 2 billion people come on to the portfolio of having access to formal health. Will we further go back? Will health, now the health is a fundamental right, it's not a luxury. While the United States pollutes the world by 26% of its transportation, that's luxury. That solutions needs to be done. But on the other hand, we are critically looking at what will happen if 2 billion people have access to health. So why not we reverse it and say that the climate solutions that the poor would adapt to is going to be a lesson to the upper middle class and the rich, how to come up with better solutions for themselves in terms of making consumption more sustainable in a manner that the world can be more inclusive from a social perspective and from an environment perspective. Today, when we design solar for a health center, people are blindly going into electrification of solar power of health centers without looking at what the building designs are, without looking at efficiency of X-ray machines, without looking at the efficiency of baby warm, etc., which my colleague Shahab will go deeper into. But the holistic way of looking at creating climate resilient solution in health is an art itself. It needs an ecosystem thinking. It's like an anthropologist who's sitting and designing systems which in 2035, just to give an example, in 2030-35, do we need such type of brick and mortar? For example, if we had to speak about in the 1980s and 90s, would landlines existed? People would have actually laughed at it, saying that no, without landlines we'd not. Now, have you ever seen a telephone wire actually go across the country? No, those number of wires have reduced. Same way how payment mechanisms have reduced. You actually sometimes never need to go to the bank to actually pay your monthly incomes or EMIs. Same way, do the poor, do they have to travel n number of kilometers to get basic health services? We need to look at 2020, 30, 35, the advent of telemedicine, the remote locations and how a doctor sitting in Houston or in New Delhi and Bangalore is able to provide appropriate services to the poor in Mysore or in Somalia, cutting down the need to have brick and mortar, which is leading to X number of buildings not to be constructed by 2035. So health, energy, climate is a huge potential for adaptation and for future mitigation. And looking at efficiencies in appliances, basic health kits, like if you look at baby warmers, autoclaves, etc., there's so much of savings that we can actually do. It's a call for most of the companies that produce this, that please don't focus more on how much extra value a dental chair can do, but focus more on the efficiency and how do you design products that are applicable for resource poor areas. Once you design it for resource poor areas, you're making health services reliable and affordable to the poor at their doorstep. Thus, a solution that is viable for a dental chair in rural say Assam is going to be valid in Harlem, in the poor parts of London, making health more accessible for the poor across the world, developed or developing country, in a manner that is automatically climate resilient. So health is something that's going to transform not only the services of providing essential services like health to the poor at the doorstep, but it's going to push the companies to come up with different innovations, which hopefully that what we learn from the health sector can actually go into livelihoods, and the way public assets are done in these centers, we can actually learn for how other public assets can be maintained in the other sectors per se. So health is critical in terms of innovation, in terms of delivery, in terms of accessibility. Once you are able to solve such things for very resource poor areas in an inclusive and a climate resilient manner, we then look at livelihoods, we then look at water services, we then look at other services in terms of that are aspirational for the poor to move on from being at one part of the financial segment to the next part of the financial segment. So health energy nexus is extremely critical for the world for stakeholder, for the private sector to be more innovative, for the government to allocate more resources to resources in a more prudent manner, so that more of its citizens can actually avail access today rather than waiting. For the end user, he or she does not have to travel kilometers even to get free service. It's never free for them because they are going to spend expensive amount of time traveling to it. Number 3. Number 4 is that you are actually making it futuristic, that health is something that links the innovations in a manner that the next step that we look at is livelihoods for the poor. So developing multiple social nets for the poor. But today, a lot of the poor are still remaining in poverty because of the primary reason their expenses for essential services like transportation and health are too much. A child gets sick, the whole monthly earnings goes towards that. Poverty is not about, removing poverty is not about increased incomes, it's also reduced expenditures. That means increasing the savings. And that's why I hope in this section of the workshops and the conference, you will have deliberations to push for innovations, push for implementation, and it's extremely critical whatever the outputs that actually come out, which will not only be a case for India to take forward, but in many ways for the poor in Africa and Latin America. So I'm wishing you all the best for these deliberations, and looking forward to hearing from Shahab once he gets back to Bangalore. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you very much.